All right.
So I'm going to turn my camera off. And go on mute.
Emma, when you just did that, it muted me as well. Did you do like a mute everybody?
No, hold on.
And I can still hear you, Alan.
I unmuted myself, but just projecting ahead. So for everybody, as your time is coming up, be ready to unmute yourself so that you hopefully we don't have too much delay in getting everybody on when we get to your different parts.
Alan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, no, I just muted myself. I think everyone just simultaneously did at the exact same time. So
Okay.
I didn't mute everyone, just myself. And yeah, everyone will unmute and turn their own cameras on. You have that control, and then we should be good.
Okay. And right now, Emma, what we're seeing is, oh, maybe that'll do it. Okay. Yep.
I got you. Okay. Yeah.
And can you just quickly run through slides 1 through, I think, 4 for me, just to make sure I have them right in my head?
Good.
Then after Grace, it just goes straight into her piece. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Did the general agenda slide, is that removed? Or just list all the topics that we're talking about?
This is the only agenda. This is the final slide deck that was in PowerPoint. That was on the Google Drive. So
That, and you're on right now.
there was an additional.
Is that slide 3?
Yes.
Okay.
This is what was in there. I didn't put together the PowerPoint, so I don't know what was taken out or what was.
Okay, no, that was the slide I was looking for. I just didn't see it when you ran through it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it goes to Grace. The agenda, you have your piece, and then you just have the general welcome.
Okay.
Go ahead and hit broadcast.
Okay, are you guys ready?
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 Yep.
Yes.
Good afternoon. We are at noon, and I want to welcome everybody to Valley Vision's Simple Steps to Make You and Your Capital Region Business Disaster Ready webinar. I will go ahead and give us a minute or so just to make sure anybody that is in the process of logging in has time to get in before we actually start. So I'll have myself on mute for a minute, but in the interim, if I could get anyone to use the chat function or just note, I just need one person, don't need everybody to do it. Just note that audio is coming through to make sure that's working. That would be wonderful. Perfect. Thank you, John. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started and want to be prompt with everybody's time. So again, want to thank you all for joining our webinar on simple steps to make you and your capital region business disaster ready. I am Alan Lang. I'm Valley Vision's project leader for the Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign, which we will be talking a little bit more about throughout the webinar today. And I'm going to be moderating today's session. I'm going to begin with just some basic housekeeping so that everybody is aware. First, all attendees, as you have joined, you are placed on mute automatically, so you won't be able to ask questions verbally or share your screen, so that's all automated on our side. But if you do have questions throughout the webinar, please do post those using the Q&A function, the question and answer box function, and we'll answer as many of those questions that come in as possible. If you have any other general comments or reactions to the panelists that don't necessarily require a response from the panelists, feel free to use the chat function. So again, try and reserve the Q&A piece for those that you specifically want answered by panelists. The last piece I wanted to note in terms of the housekeeping is that this webinar is being recorded. We will be posting this to Valley Vision's YouTube page upon the completion of the webinar today, or I should say probably sometime a little bit later this afternoon. So you'll be able to access it after we are finished with our webinar this afternoon. And as we shift to the actual content piece of our webinar today, want to actually begin by just stating the obvious. The COVID-19 public health pandemic has been a very sharp reminder for all of us that disasters happen very unexpectedly. And it's also taught us how difficult life can be when aspects of daily living that we often take for granted end up no longer being available to us on a regular basis. Our real hope is that everyone is able to use this experience that we've had to help better prepare themselves, their families, their businesses, neighbors, other loved ones for the next disaster that might be coming, whether it's a public health emergency or a natural disaster like a fire or flood, which we're both vulnerable for here in the Capital Region. This is something that Valley Vision has been involved in for several years through current work like our Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign, and also past work that we've done around things like the Business Resiliency Initiative. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by several colleagues and experts who are going to be sharing information and specific advice for everybody from their own research they have done, their own experience that they've lived. And I know that this will be beneficial for everybody as we try to become more disaster ready, again, for ourselves, for our businesses, and for our community as a whole. During today's webinar, and if we can go over to the agenda for the day, we're going to be covering several different items. First, we're going to hear from Grace Kaufman of Valley Vision, who's going to be discussing climate impacts on disaster risks in the area and how that is impacting both the disaster risk, our environment, businesses as well. We're also going to learn about a multi-hazard vulnerability index from Sacramento State professor Matt Schmittlein. He's going to help us determine, with that index, it helps us determine which of our residents are most vulnerable, where they live, and how we need to be considering that as we start to make our own plans and plans for our community as well. We're also going to receive information from the Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign about its curriculum that has been designed and created specifically for targeting our vulnerable populations to make sure the simple, easy steps for personal disaster preparedness can be taken by all of us. And our next item, final item on the agenda, is going to be getting insights from Megan Phillips of Honey Agency, as well as Meg Arnold of Valley Vision, about the importance of disaster resiliency and how that's going to be important for our businesses in the Sacramento region. Of course, throughout all these presentations, we are going to have time for Q&A from you all. And we're going to have time at the end as well for you to ask any questions that you might have. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off here and turn it over to our first speaker of the day. Again, that's Grace Kaufman, our project manager at Valley Vision. She works in our clean economy impact area, as well as on the Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign. And she's going to be discussing the expected climate change impacts of the region's economy, environment, and public health. Grace, if I can turn it over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Alan. And as he mentioned, my name is Grace Kaufman, and I am a project manager here at Valley Vision. I support Valley Vision's Sustainable Communities partnership with SMUD, and I also work with Alan and Hua Vang, who will present after Matt on the Listos California campaign. I'm thrilled to be here with you all and to briefly share about some of the impacts the Capital Region is expected to experience in the next century. This region faces a unique set of challenges from the impacts of climate change. The impacts have and will continue to affect the region's economy, natural resources, public health, and infrastructure. It's critically important for individuals and businesses to be aware of and prepare for the impacts of climate change and the impacts of climate emergencies. Climate change is already affecting agriculture, infrastructure, transportation, energy, recreation, industry, human health, and natural ecosystems in the region. Extreme weather and natural hazards will continue to impact these and other sectors in the 21st century. Next slide. So the first impact I want to touch on is wildfires. So wildfires, both the total area burned, the number of wildfires, and the severity of wildfires have increased in the Western United States due to climate change and forest management practices that promoted high dense forests, allowing for more fuel to accumulate. As a result, wetter winters and drier summers are likely to increase summer and wildfire activity. Can you hit the next? Yeah, thank you. Wetter winters increase plant growth, which increases the amount of fuel or wildfire in the spring and summer months. We saw this in 2012 to 2016 with the drought that was followed by the region's wettest winter on record, and that also created a record-breaking season of wildfires. The increases in wildfires are also driven by an earlier spring season and less summer moisture. These wildfires bring significant air quality and public health risks, as well as economic disruptions to rural communities in particular. As you'll recall the Camp Fire in Paradise, though it was over 100 miles away, the fire was large enough to create an air quality event in the region that lasted weeks and impacted our economy, businesses, and schools. Rural communities and hilly and forested areas are exposed to greater fire risk with climate change and often have fewer and smaller roads that lead out to the town compared to urban communities. An increased rural sprawl also increases the surface and groundwater demand and depletion and extends utility electric lines that can lead to fires. Next slide. So Sacramento's climate in 40 years will resemble Phoenix's climate today. This will particularly impact historically underserved populations such as farm workers, tribal communities, prisoners, and low-income people. They have and will continue to be the hardest hit from wildfires, heat, and climate change in general. So it's important to prioritize these communities who are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Businesses and individuals need to also prepare for the public health outcomes with more frequent and prolonged heat waves. These heat waves can impair our water supplies and quality and can also lead to more frequent harmful algae blooms and air pollution from wildfires. And with the longer heat waves, the region will also experience longer daytime and nighttime temperatures versus just daytime increases. So that'll affect our ecosystems here and our wildlife. These extreme events also, the air pollution from wildfires impose serious health risks to people. The long-term exposure to automobile exhaust, stationary fuel combustion can also result in upper respiratory disease, and with high temperatures that increases the potency of the air pollution on health. Next slide. And then, yeah, great. More frequent and extreme heat waves will have a significant impact on public health. As I mentioned, people who work outdoors will experience greater heat risk and exposure to air pollution from wildfires. This is also evident in the Camp Fire in 2018. Outdoor recreation will also be impacted, particularly in the areas of the region which lack adequate tree coverage. And as you can see from California's heat wave in 2006, a single heat wave can take a toll on human health and emergency and healthcare systems across the state. Next slide. The Capital Region has a history of flooding. During the Great Flood of 1862, which this photo is placed from, Sacramento remained underwater for months, triggering a massive reconstruction project that actually raised our downtown 10 to 15 feet. Fun fact, on January 10th in that year, 1862, the newly elected Governor Stanford was forced to travel by rowboat to the inauguration ceremony that was held at the partially submerged Capitol building. And since they were unable to move the city or really use any of the state buildings, the state legislature was forced to temporarily relocate to San Francisco. And the business disruption costs $325 billion in addition to the $400 billion in property repair costs. So you can imagine how costly a comparable flood would be today. And since 1950, 20 floods have resulted in state and federal disasters for our region. The Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, or SAFCA, identifies Sacramento as the greatest metropolitan flood risk in the country. In the follow-up resources that will be included in the email, I'll include a brief video that'll go into further detail about the flood risk this region faces. And that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Grace. Really appreciate that as outstanding context for our entire webinar that we're having today. Really important reminder that as we talk about emergency preparedness, not just important for the days and weeks to come, but Grace, as you commented, even as we look out and project out 40 years ahead, important to start making those preparations now and moving forward so that we are able to address any of those emergencies that might come about. Do want to leave it open for at least a few more seconds to see. I'm not seeing any questions that were asked for that particular segment, but do want to take a chance. If anybody had any questions, please use the Q&A function. And we will, of course, save time at the end as well for anything else that might come up. So seeing nothing coming in, I am going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter, our next panelist. And that is Matt Schmittlein, who is a professor at Sacramento State's Geography Department, as well as partner with the consulting firm Community Health Insights. Matt's done a lot of work in, frankly, a lot of different areas, but as it relates to our presentation today, done a lot of work with California's Office of Emergency Services, as well as the Listos California project to better pinpoint the interface between natural disaster risks, as well as where the vulnerable populations in our community live. This is, again, very, very helpful to really help identify where those particular neighborhoods are, where those people are that might be most at risk if we do have a disaster of any type. So Matt, if I can go ahead and welcome you and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate this opportunity to share some of this work with y'all. As Alan said, my research and focus, again, I'm a professor at Sac State and a managing partner for Community Health Insights. And in all of this work that I do, my focus is really on trying to find those places where we are most likely to see poor outcomes from a wide range of disturbances, ranging from public health events to natural hazards and disasters. And one of the things that I think is important for us to recognize as we're thinking about addressing these kinds of issues, trying to reduce the impact of these kinds of issues, we need to recognize that disaster events occur because of the interaction between physical processes and social systems. So whether we're talking about the various hydrometeorological events that could impact our region, high winds, drought, heat wave, geophysical events, earthquakes and landslides, or biological events, wildfires, pandemics, things like this. In each one of these cases, we have a sort of natural physical processes that are operating, and they become problematic for us because of the way we structure ourselves as a society that leaves us to have sort of more or less vulnerability to these different types of hazard events. If we want to understand those places where we may be more likely to see poorer outcomes, higher losses or greater difficulty in recovering from those losses, if we want to identify those areas, we need to consider both the characteristics of the hazard events themselves, as well as the characteristics of the populations in those areas. And it's that interaction between these social and physical systems that can help us to anticipate where we may be likely to see the highest losses. And that can help us to orient ourselves as we try to understand the causes of vulnerability in different areas. And as we start to think about what are the things that we could do to mitigate or ameliorate those issues. If we could get the next slide, please. What I want to present to y'all on today is to share with you some work that we've conducted as part of the Listos California project to try to understand those areas within our region where we have a higher vulnerability, a higher likelihood of loss or difficulty in recovering from those losses from a range of disaster events. We've created this multi-hazard vulnerability index. This work, again, was done specifically for Listos California, but it was based on work that we also did for the California Office of Emergency Services in the 2018 California Statewide Hazard Mitigation Plan. It's important, again, as we're doing this work, what we're trying to do is to combine information on socioeconomic and demographic characteristics that can help us to understand the composition of populations in different areas. We'll look at characteristics associated with access to various resources, cultural or linguistic isolation, access and functional needs. And then we also look at a variety of different hazard events for the area. As I said, there are a multitude of hazard events that impact our area, but there's a smaller set of hazard events that have sort of a spatially differentiated impact, where we're likely to see higher risk associated with a particular hazard event in one area versus the other area. So to address these sorts of issues and creating this multi-hazard vulnerability index, we identified data sets to look at the spatially differentiated flood, wildfire, and earthquake hazard risks. And what we did is combined each of those inputs. I want to give you guys sort of a high-level overview here. If you're interested in getting into the details of this, we could definitely do so later on. But we combined the information from these multiple hazards to create a multi-hazard map that sort of showed the differences in hazard risk, if you will, across the region. We also collected a host of socioeconomic variables that addressed some underlying issues. These are variables that have consistently been seen in research literature as influencing differential losses or differential recovery from disaster events. And we combined those layers together to create a social vulnerability map. And then we combined the social vulnerability and the multiple hazard map to create a multi-hazard vulnerability map. One of the things I want to emphasize, building on the great information that Grace shared with us, is we need to be aware of the hazardous conditions, but I think an important thing for us to recognize is we often have a more immediate capacity to address social issues, some of these social issues, than broader physical processes. And so it's very critical that we consider both the hazard and those changing physical systems, but also the social systems as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, the map here is the results of that regional multi-hazard vulnerability index. Again, looking at combining the flood, wildfire, and earthquake hazard map with a social vulnerability map based on multiple different variables describing the composition of populations. It's important to note in the output here that we're not looking at the number of people in any given location. Instead, what we're doing is we're looking at the composition of the population, those characteristics in the area that may make that population more likely to experience losses from the hazards they face, or again, have greater difficulty in overcoming those losses. As we look across the region, we can see a couple of areas. The darker colors here represent areas that have a higher multi-hazard vulnerability. And the general themes, unsurprisingly, I'm sure to many of y'all, is the further towards the west we go, in general, the higher the earthquake vulnerability. Also, the further towards the east, up in the mountains, in the Central Valley, we have, around the Sacramento region, we have a relatively lower earthquake risk than many of the other portions of the state. So as we get up into the foothills and in the mountains and then down towards the Bay Area, we see areas with higher vulnerability due to higher earthquake risk, higher likelihood of ground shaking. And what we're also seeing in some of these areas in and around the Delta is elevated vulnerability due to flood. So we can see relatively high flood risk in portions of Solano County, and then through San Joaquin, Sacramento, and up into southern Yuba counties associated with flood risk, and Yolo County as well. And then we also begin to see areas with elevated wildfire risk, the higher vulnerability, multi-hazard vulnerability due to wildfire, as we look up into the foothills and in the Tahoe Basin, as well as out through the Capay Valley area. So we see multiple hazard events that are driving the issues throughout the region. We also see multiple socioeconomic characteristics. For example, in the Capay Valley area over here, we see relatively higher percentages of the populations with some disability and sensitive age groups, with minority status, or who have issues with lower socioeconomic status or food accessibility. When we're looking over here in the southwestern portion of Solano County, we see higher concentrations of people who are renting, which research shows folks are less likely to be able to implement particular mitigation measures in the structures that they're living in. Also, some of these communities have food access issues and lower socioeconomic status. As we get into the Delta area through Sacramento and San Joaquin counties, we see higher populations with limited English ability, renters, disability issues, lower levels of education. We also see more folks in long-term care facilities in some of these areas. Up here, this pocket of higher vulnerability in Sacramento, we see again a higher percentage of minority populations, renters, food accessibility issues, and on throughout these areas, consistently in the foothills and up in the Tahoe area, again, more elderly population, education issues with many of the population there, and food accessibility issues throughout many of the rural regions. This information can allow us again to sort of orient ourselves to understand where we may see elevated vulnerability and begin to suggest to us the kinds of issues that are being dealt with. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that what we're using is sort of a course overview, census data, et cetera, and this doesn't necessarily speak to the lived experience of the community in an area or any of the individuals in the area. But what this helps us to do is orient ourselves to the hazards and to some of the general characteristics of the populations throughout our region, to begin to help us ask the questions that will lead us to understand what we can do to address these issues. So I see a question from Richard Price: are there similar maps available for other regions? So this data draws upon the work that was done for the Listos California project, and I believe Valley Vision has many of these maps on a county by county basis throughout the state.
We do, Matt, and if I can jump in, this is Alan from Valley Vision. We do have for each one of the counties in California, through the work that Matt did, these maps that go into even actually more detail than this. It's kind of the full report for each one of those counties, and could definitely distribute, make that available to anybody that wants. So we would just encourage you to go ahead and let us know if you would like one of those maps. And we can also provide links or send them directly after the meeting. So we'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, Alan. And we're looking at a relatively short period of time during this meeting for this topic because we have such a volume of other information to share. I would encourage you guys, if interested, to look at those map packets because it looks not just at the vulnerability index, but all of the different sets of variables beneath it. And hopefully that could help y'all to have a deeper understanding of what's driving these factors leading to vulnerability in these areas. And that's the material I have prepared.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Matt. So we did have the one question that came in that Matt has already addressed. Do you want to give another half a second? See any other questions on any of the map data, the index data that Matt presented? And again, just want to leave that open to make sure there are no quick questions. Okay, and again, I'll go back and say we'll have some time at the end if you do think of anything in the interim. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that once again, Matt. Really helps highlight again how important it is to be prepared, not just individually, but for a community as a whole, and thinking about all the different populations, all the different needs that might be out there to help us be resilient if we do find ourselves faced with disaster. Next up, I'm going to introduce Hua Vang, who is my colleague here at Valley Vision, has been working on the Listos California Emergency Preparedness Campaign. And she is going to be going into some detail on simple steps you can take to help make yourself prepared, your family, your loved ones prepared. So this is where we get a little bit more as compared to Grace and Matt talking about what are the issues, what are the conditions, what do we need to be concerned about or expecting in the future. Hua begins some of our discussion today just about what are some of those steps that you can take to better prepare yourself. So Hua, if I can turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Hua Vang, Project Associate at Valley Vision, working on their Healthy Communities portfolio, specifically for Listos, California. And for Listos, California, we're here to ensure on a statewide level that we're engaging vulnerable and diverse populations in California in emergency preparedness activities. So I just want to thank everyone again for being here today and for taking already that first step to safeguard yourself and your loved ones and even your friends and family from natural disasters that may come. As Ellen had mentioned, these are simple steps that you can take, really easy to make. And just from my own research and personal experience of looking at existing emergency preparedness materials, they could be pretty extensive and intimidating to approach. Sometimes you don't know where to start or even wonder if you have the time and the funding to do it all. But we're here to consolidate just 5 simple, easy steps for you to get started. So if I could go to the next slide. So what exactly are those 5 steps that we will be going over today? Oh, sorry, it's the next one. We will be going over how you could get alerts so that you know what to do, how to make a plan to protect yourself and your loved ones, packing a go bag with things that you need, building a stay box for when you can't leave, and helping your friends and neighbors get ready when natural disasters do arise. Next slide. And before we go into the first step of getting alerts, I forgot to mention as well that this will be in the next couple of 10 minutes, an interactive workshop. So I will be launching polls. They're almost like pop quizzes where it's interactive and you can vote on some of the questions that I will be asking. And one question that I do have now to help me gauge our audience who are listening in, how many of you have an emergency plan? And the poll will launch on your screen. And so you can just vote in yes or no. And then we'll have it up for the next couple of seconds and see what the results will look like. Okay, great. So it looks like so far, 64% of us we don't have an emergency preparedness plan, and then 36% of us do have one. So for those of you who do already have an emergency preparedness plan, great job, thumbs up. Hopefully some of the steps that we talk about today, you can also include in your wealth of knowledge and that you can also include in your plan. And for those of you who have not have an emergency preparedness plan, you're in for a good treat. And so we're hoping that the next 5 steps will be super simple and easy to make that you could do immediately after the workshop. Okay, so the first step is getting your alerts. You could get alerts in so many different forms and media outlets. Some of them is TV, your radio, email, and a lot of us in the 21st century now have smartphones. So you could download an app, and one of the apps that we have is called Cal Alerts. And you can go to the website, calalerts.org, sign up for that. And this is created by the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And you'll receive 3 types of alerts on a national, state, and local level. And those 3 alerts that you will receive will be on national emergencies, weather threats in your local area, and also Amber Alerts in your local area. Another way you can get alerts is social media. There's been data out there where folks are now receiving news and updates from social media, especially on Facebook and Twitter. We also have other resources called 211, available also in the Sacramento area. And it's a free helpline that they can connect you to health and human services if you want to know more information on where you get food and nutrition, shelter, or even employment services. 201 is a great place to go to, and we do have one in Sacramento. I will provide contact information in our follow-up email so that you can contact them for the future. Next slide. The second one is making a plan, and that is to create your contact list. So as you see on the screen here, we have like a worksheet that's from one of the Listos California disaster ready guides that we will also provide in our follow-up email so that you can write it down and have a worksheet to start off from. And you're just write down those that you want to have in your emergency contact list. It could be your school, your children's information, your loved ones, your friends, your family, and your neighbors, just in case that when an emergency does happen, all of us might be in different locations, different places at different time. And so it's good to know how you can contact them when that does happen. So this is a good moment to think about who do you want in your contact list and who do you want to be to make sure that they're there and protected and being safeguarded so that when you are separated, how can you connect with one another? One thing that we do recommend including is one person who lives outside of your region in case that if your local area is affected by a natural disaster, that you have someone outside of that area to still connect with and to ensure that you're safe in your area. And so I will launch a poll right now and ask you, who would you like to have in your contact list? And this is multiple choice. There are different answers. If there's an answer that's not there, feel free to go onto the chat box and type in other folks that you will also like to include in your Connect and Protect contact list. Okay, thank you so much for the vote. I noticed on the chat box that the poll didn't let you select more than one answer. Apologies for that. That was a mistake on our end for not making it a multiple choice answer. But I definitely see that family members is 64% from some of you, and then 18% children, and then 9% workplace. Definitely family members, especially our nuclear family members. We want to make sure that everyone's safe, especially those who are very close to us in proximity. Another one that's not on the list is also caregiver as well. We may have someone who's taking care of our loved ones in which we may not have close, we may be in different places and location, but they may be overseeing your grandparents or your parent or even children as well who may not be able to access the phone or any way to contact you. So caregiver is also an option to put in your contact list as well. Okay, thank you so much everyone for voting that, and apologies for the technical issue that we have there. If we could go to the next slide for our next step, in addition to making a plan, is also practice having an evacuation plan as well. Identify safe places that you will want to meet your family members, just in case your home or your particular area is affected by natural disasters. Practice multiple ways in getting there, because there may be different routes that may have a tree fallen or that there's a fire in that particular route that you can't get around. So it's also good to have backup plans and meet up places to meet your loved ones. And last but not least, listen to local authorities who could help guide you in best routes that you can go to, so that you can get out safely from the area that it is affected. Okay, next slide. The third step is packing a go bag, and you want to pack things for each of your household, including your pets, because they are also family. And so these are just your everyday items. And some of the images that we have here on the screen are your identification cards, insurance documents, family photos. We definitely want to keep those mementos. It's what help us have hope and faith and stay connected with one another. You want to have cash in small bills, such as ones and $5 bills, your evacuation or local map in the area, and the medication list that you may have as well. That way your family members will know what medications you will need in case you are separated, some of the medications that you will need. And last but not least, as mentioned many times in the past couple of minutes, is the Disaster Ready Guide, in which we will also provide after this call, and it's an extensive and detailed list of the 5 steps that I will provide in this webinar, in addition to the local disaster resource directory, in which you could list all of the emergency authorities or departments, fire departments, police departments on that list that we have in our local area. And so if I could launch the next poll and just ask everyone, what are some of the things that you will want to have in your go bag? Oh, and just note that these are some of the few examples that we have listed here. You're not limited to what we have on our slides, because only you and your family know exactly what what are some of the important needs that you need. So feel free to pick up the vote. It should be multiple choice, so hopefully that would work this time. Okay, thank you. So some of our top items that we want to put in our go bag is cash, super important, and our cell phone. Cell phone is like our mini laptop and computer to go. It has all the information, and you call folks, have access to the internet and any of the apps and alerts that you have. Follow up, we have identification cards and insurance documents that we would want to have in our go bag. On our chat function, I also see that we have physician contact information and toothbrush and floss. Definitely want to make sure that we're also keeping our hygiene well and well kept as well. So thank you so much for voting on the poll. So again, these are just some of the recommended lists that we have, but again, only you and your family know additional items that you will need during an emergency. So we could go to the next slide. And this next step is creating a stay box. This is what a box of items that you will have in case you cannot evacuate your local area. In some cases, sometimes it's safer to stay at your home versus evacuating. And for that stay box, it's like a large storage bin. You want to make sure you prepare for at least 3 days for each of your family member in the household. For water, you want to make sure there's at least 3 gallons of water per family member. There's food that is non-perishable, trash bags, and trash cans with ties. Again, this is also a list that we recommend, and feel free to build off from the list that we have. One thing that's not mentioned in this slide here is make sure that you have flashlight, portable radio, and extra batteries, and keep it in a place where it's easily accessible when emergencies do strike, so that you know where to find them in case there's power outages, and you can easily find those flashlights and batteries for use. These are some of the items that you can definitely build over time, and have an activity that you can have with your friends and family and figure out what are some lists that you could start including in your storage bin. Okay, and then we will go to our last slide and our last step. And this is to help your friends and your neighbors as well. Sometimes the reality is that when a large emergency does strike, not all firefighters or paramedics, they cannot help everyone immediately. And so sometimes the best support that you have is within your own community, within your friends and your neighbors who are around you. And one of the simple steps that you could do is just sharing these 5 steps to your friends and neighbors on how they could prepare themselves for natural disasters. And we understand that everyone have different circumstances in which they can help themselves. So think about those that you want to help outside of your household or your family who may need that extra help or a hand to help themselves for an emergency. And if we go to the next slide, just letting you all know that you are definitely the change. And I thank you again for being here. The fact that you are here, you're already taking that first step to safeguard yourself and your family member. By choosing to participate, you have already made this community a lot stronger. So thank you again. And these are just the 5 steps, just a quick recap. It's getting your local emergency alerts, creating a go bag, creating a stay box, and then helping your friends and family. And last but not least, it's also, sorry, I have like the hair right now. I'm just like super excited and nervous at the same time. So if there's any questions, definitely let me know and then I could try to answer that. Otherwise, this is the 5 simple steps that we hope you could walk away and get started after the webinar. Easy to do and just that's things that you can find in your household and out from the reach of your fingertips. Thank you.
That is terrific. Thank you so much, Hua. And there was one question that came in. Hua, could you just repeat the name of the alert application? And more people
Yes.
can go to get that.
So it's called Cal Alerts, and you could get that calalerts.org. And then we will also send out a follow-up email with this information as well. I'll just type in really quickly on the chat the URL.
Thank you. All right. So as Hua said, important pieces to keep in mind there. All those were simple, easy steps. And now as we're still in a stay-at-home kind of environment, now is the perfect time to be working with your families, your loved ones to help prepare and put together your own emergency plans. So there's no better time than now to do that. The next, our final panelists for today are going to be Megan Phillips, the CEO of Honey Agency, and Meg Arnold, the interim CEO of Valley Vision. So I want to welcome you both. This is going to be a great opportunity for them to both talk about some of the work that's been done in terms of business resiliency and the importance of businesses being prepared and the impact that emergencies and disasters could have on our region's businesses for the area. So Meg and Megan, I want to welcome you both and thank you for presenting with us today.
Thank you, Alan, and happy to be here. I want to sort of acknowledge the obvious reality that this emergency preparedness session and webinar dwells mostly on physical disasters and frankly, mostly on natural disasters. As Grace mentioned at the beginning of the session, we are prone and we are vulnerable to a range of natural disasters that can have community-wide impacts. And all of that is true and very important. And at the same time, as Alan was just saying, we are also simultaneously in the midst of an economic disaster that does not have physical causes, but has the public health cause of COVID-19. So I don't want to underestimate the impact or seem to avoid the realities of the impact that the current disaster is having on small businesses across our region. It is true that even in this context, natural disasters are also still possible. And it is also true that, as Alan had said, that this, even in the midst of disaster, can be a great time to plan for, prepare for, and improve the resilience of one's business to disaster. So just with that as context, about 6 years ago at Valley Vision, we recognized a number of hard truths about our region. First of all, that we are, as Grace said, vulnerable to a variety of natural disasters that could affect broad portions of our region's geography and economy. In one fell swoop, ranging from flood in the downtown areas of our largest cities to fire in either our agricultural or in our forested communities. Second hard truth is that our region's economy is dominated by small businesses. This is very similar to regions across the state and across the region. There are about 30 million small businesses across the country, and together they account for about 47% of total employment. In our region, we have about 60,000 small businesses, and they account for almost 80% of total private sector employment in our region. And so you can see the importance, obviously, of each individual small business, but absolutely and especially of all of those in aggregate. And then the final hard truth that we realized is that small businesses are often the least prepared for a disaster and the least able to survive through unexpected closures. This comes for a number of different reasons. First of all, many times they have only a single physical location for their office and for their operations, with very limited ability to relocate if needed. Often they also have fairly limited financial resources and reserves to fall back upon. And then thirdly, many small business owners are so busy, quite rightly, running the business and the urgencies of the business on a daily basis, that there's limited time and human resource capacity to invest in other necessities such as resilience planning and preparedness. So as a result of recognizing these realities, we launched the the Business Resiliency Initiative, or BRI, a number of years ago, and created something that we called the BRI Toolkit to help small businesses step through the process of creating a resiliency or preparedness plan for themselves. The BRI Toolkit still remains online at resilientbusiness.org. Much more recently, and I'm going to transition to Megan, but much more recently in 2018, Megan Phillips and her firm Honey have partnered with the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency of the state and their campaign partner, the California Academy for Economic Development, on a campaign called Outsmart Disaster. And I'd love to turn it over to you, Megan, to provide an update and share the outlines for us of Outsmart Disaster.
Thanks, Meg. And thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this conversation today. I think, it is, as you said, it's important to think about all disasters, but I think there's one that's really heavy on all of our minds. And especially, as you said, with 80% of our region being small businesses, Honey is probably a makeup of one of those. This has been a conversation that is 24 hours a day in my head. And I think for a lot of other peers of mine, it's so important that resiliency is now part of our DNA. But to kind of talk a little bit about what Honey has been working on, we've been sort of the creative communications partner for the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as alongside California Academy. And we have been working since 2018 on talking about resiliency with regards to sort of the Bay Area and the high probability of an earthquake happening. But you know what really was an aha moment for us was that as we started to kind of talk to businesses in the Bay Area about sort of being resilient through an earthquake, we realized immediately that we had to really think through what the effects were for small businesses. Because when we would talk to the large corporate partners, we realized that they had continuity programs, they had resiliency, and they kept turning to us and saying, we're more worried about our employees who are going to come to work and not have that deli down the street, or not have that, small business that they're used to supporting and the commerce of that. So we have then, in the past 2 years, pivoted from sort of a Bay Area earthquake-focused disaster preparedness resiliency campaign to now moving statewide. And as of last night, we launched outsmartdisaster.com in its newest form, which really talks about resiliency for businesses specifically. I think Listos is doing an incredible job with disaster preparedness, really getting to those vulnerable populations and hard to reach populations. But we really realized that we have to talk to the business, and we have to make sure that they're outsmarting disaster and really being part of, thinking through, you do your taxes, you think about your HR, you're a small business that's in survival mode, but now your DNA and the makeup of your business must include resiliency. And for us, it was just a really important moment to think through that statewide look. And over the course of the next few weeks, you are going to see, we actually are going to launch this in early June, an Evolved Resilient Business Challenge, which allows a self-guided sort of program that you can see how resilient your business is and what efforts you need to make to become resilient. So that will be launching in about 3 to 4 weeks. We're also going to be launching a resiliency toolkit. There's phenomenal toolkits across the state. We just hope that this is very audience specific and very business oriented. And we hope that it's also extremely user friendly. As a design agency first, we really wanted to think through design thinking and what that means and really how easy it should be, because if it's a huge barrier, we all know we're not going to do it. As you said, Meg, we're all in survival mode. We're all working through, what needs to happen next and how to pay our employees or keep, the rent over our businesses. But this is something we wanted to think through, is just easy tools, how to do it, and make sure that every year you're looking at it and making sure it's part of what you do as your makeup of your business. What's also really exciting is that we're launching our first cohort and curriculum in Sonoma and Napa. We are doing, with our partners, we are going to be looking at curriculum training. Of course, we'll be doing it most likely in a format that is going to be virtual, which hopefully will actually expand and be touched by more people. But really walking through, making sure that we have the tools that can walk people through being resilient in that region. And then we're going to be extending on to different areas. What's, really interesting is that all of the tools that we're essentially deploying are curated by amazing sort of think tank partners. And we have an advisory board that's not just made up of, it's made up of just an amazing group of brain trust folks around the state who are helping us build information in. And that's what's really exciting. So I know the slide hasn't gone forward yet, but we want to just make sure that you saw the website and what is launched. outsmartdisaster.com. There's an area for you to sign up. Please make sure your business is part of this, and we'll make sure that you're absolutely getting the information when we launch it. If you want to go to the next slide, is the new site. There we go. And of course, when a disaster hits, I think it is a disaster has hit. So really, it's not when, it is now. And we want to make sure that we're launching this appropriately fast and helping you rapidly respond. Last but not least, I just want to say, this is a moment in time where we not only think about that resiliency is part of our DNA, but larger corporations have the opportunity to mentor and be supports. If you have a continuity or resiliency program, we'd love to hear from you. It's so important that the companies that have been doing it are also mentoring, because when you think about what a small business is going to have a struggle understanding what resiliency is and means. And there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to collaborate and think through how we can outsmart disaster together.
Megan, I just wanted to ask a follow-up, and thank you to the folks managing the slides who did that better than both of us remembered to. I had a question for you about the Outsmart Disaster program, and whether you have sort of a target ideal type business in mind, whether it's size or industry sector or et cetera, when you were designing the program.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we evolved it to a statewide effort, we really did evolve it to help more of a small to medium-sized business. Those are the folks that we know don't necessarily have their resiliency efforts in place. And we also moved it from when we went from Silicon Valley and San Francisco, thinking about an earthquake being a high probability. We also realized that we were, talking sometimes to residential and to, not necessarily businesses. And we are 100% focused on business resiliency and Outsmart Disasters efforts, small to medium size, and understanding the nuances of what that means. Just, nuances as much as, data backup. What needs to happen from human resources perspectives.
Right.
And it's just a very simple checklist that even myself as a small business has thought through more now, understanding those little idiosyncrasies that you must think through as your own checklist. I mean, data backup is important as we've all moved remote even, and I think that we really just need to have this, again, as I mentioned, part of our DNA. When you do your taxes, when you file with the Secretary of State, you also look at your resiliency program and remind your employees about what those efforts are that are going to be made.
Great point. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Alan, so we'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you both, Megan and Meg. Do you want to see if there were any questions specific to our last segment that came up? There's nothing in the Q&A function right now, but I'll give it a second. Or if there are questions for any other panelists, feel free to raise those as well. As I'm keeping an eye on that Q&A function, want to again thank definitely all of our panelists that joined us today. Great information shared that is applicable to our individual and family lives, our neighborhoods, our businesses. And we really hope that everybody that's joining us for this webinar today, you go ahead and take some of that information that you gained, use it to make yourself better prepared, but also share that information with others in your networks. It could be the person that you live next door to. It could be the business that is a supplier of yours. Help get that information out, because it's really going to take that socialization amongst all of us to encourage, promote, and prompt all of us taking that emergency preparedness steps that are needed to keep us as resilient as possible as a region in California. I'll close with a couple notes. First is, again, just a reminder that the webinar has been recorded today, and it will be posted to Valley Vision's YouTube page that you can find through our homepage, our valleyvision.org homepage. At the bottom of that, you'll be able to find a link to our YouTube page. Also noting that follow-up email will be sent to everyone that registered for the webinar today. That includes all the resources that we talked about, the slide deck as well, so that you will have that information. And I think I can say confidently that all of our panelists, as well as everybody on the Valley Vision team, very open, receptive to any follow-up questions you might have. So if you want to send that to Valley Vision, we'll be sure to get it to our panelist if it's directed that, or we'll answer it ourselves. The final note is just to be sure that everybody, if you are interested in other webinars that Valley Vision might be putting forward, check that out on our Valley Vision events page, again, on our website under the events tab, and you can check that out. And seeing that there are no other questions that have come in, I will go ahead and conclude our session for today. So again, want to thank all of our panelists for the great research and information provided, as well as all the attendees on today's webinar. We wish you all safety and good health as we move forward. And thank you all for joining today.